I was in a rush for a really long time to get somewhere. And I think a big part of that, the reason for that is because we're ridiculously uncomfortable. Right? Like we're uncomfortable in our bodies. We're uncomfortable with these fragmented parts of ourselves wreaking havoc within our systems, right? It's like, I want to be over this as soon as possible. And then there's this other part of me that felt like if I wasn't vigilant and consistent at all moments in attending to mending these wounded parts of the self, that I was going to somehow miss the opportunity. And then I figured out one day, and I don't remember exactly how it manifested, but barring like getting hit by a bus and being taken out instantly, or having a very abrupt ending, if I move into my twilight years and I move into old age and I have an organic passing, it will be impossible to miss the lessons, right? You move slowly into that experience where what you're experiencing is an apprenticeship with loss, right? We're losing capacity, we're losing ability, we're losing our ability to see more, like we start losing everything. And in that is the things really that we've been avoiding. And on the other side of those, if we can surrender into them, on the other side of those forms of absence or loss, there's an equal correlation of liberation that lives in there. There's an equal correlation of life that's paralleled, wedded, inextricably wedded to that essence of death or of loss or of surrender. They always exist as a duality. And so if we're awake as we move into our death, it's going to be an experience of movement into liberation. Like, because the self that we've been trying to cultivate for these last few years has nothing left in the way of it from moving into the fullness of its expression, right? Every part of you that you let go of is a space for that deep self to now occupy and to step into. And we eventually recognize this. It's like, oh, anytime loss is taking place within me, what that loss really is a loss of identity, a loss of an outdated version of identity more often than not, and a loss of a fixed point of the ego grappling for control. And when we eventually get to the place where we're like, oh, okay, well, if that's falling away, it must be time. And I'm excited. And it used to be like, oh, I can't wait to see what emerges in its absence. And it's like, well, its absence is the emergence. Its absence allows space for that deeper version of the self to actually occupy, right? And so the absence is the gift. The loss is the gift if you've become in touch with that expression of the soul and you're doing the work to let it move into the field. Every loss becomes a gain in that, from that perspective, in that space, and through that awareness, every loss becomes a gain. And it's both. Like, it's you'll mourn the loss, but you'll be excited and celebrating the emergence that results directly as a result of that loss. And it's true across the board, and it has so many versions of reciprocity within our experience of the world, including relationships and friendships and our bodies, our minds, our senses. Like, we eventually lose them all, right? There's not one thing that we can take with us, not a single thing. And getting to this is the whole concept of, if you can die before you die, you don't die when you die. If you can learn to surrender at that level, you understand where the mystics live, right? That's what the mystics do. That's what the shamans and the seers and the sages and all these poetic stories about transcending the self happens through surrender, happens through letting yourself go. And that's a really messy process in the beginning, but it eventually becomes a really beautiful one, because you recognize eventually what you're letting go of is the lowest expression of yourself. And in the absence of that part of you, which is necessary and beautiful in its own way, there's this even deeper part that steps into the field, and that part is fueled by joy, not fear. That part is fueled by curiosity and inspiration and gratitude. And that's a very different way of moving through life. And the ego knows not of these things, right? It isn't designed to know these things. And it's not until it's lovingly surrendered, and we stop situating our identity inside it. When the ego has its grips and we're identifying in the ego, it's the lens we look at the world through. When we let that lens down, we lose ourselves. We lose a version of ourselves, an expression of ourselves, a part of ourselves seems to be going away, but all that's really being laid down is this manufactured persona, which is just a layer of defense, right? All you're letting go of is the defense system. And you see all these old myths of like the warrior laying down the sword, right? And it's such a powerful metaphor for what that experience within us is actually like, because in order to move into that place of liberation, it lives inside the heart of vulnerability. And in order to be vulnerable, you have to take the armor off and you have to put the sword on the ground. And then you're like, oh my God, I have no defenses. And it's like, yep, that's the truth. And that's always been the truth, right? And you recognize in that moment how busy the defense system has been since the beginning of your existence, fortifying all of these layers of identity around the core you. And it only takes stepping into that core you for a moment to spot what those defense systems look like, and then you get busy to letting them all go, right? Because you recognize that there isn't one that's serving, every single version of it is an old version trying to prevent some new experience of hurt. And it's like, no, the best way to prepare for that is to be fully present, right? Let some new defense manufacture itself in the moment and then let it go the moment it's no longer necessary. Let's not let the old parts of us that are trying to prevent a wound that happened a long time ago, it just never works. It's like you eventually see how ridiculous the defense system and how unnecessary it is and how counterproductive it is, because it's never accurate. And you recognize eventually that the greatest form of defense you're ever going to have is the absence of the defense system, because that allows you to be fully present, to be fully available, and to be fully engaged in whatever is present before you. If you apply the metaphor of dismantling the defense system and the mastery that results on account of that, and you then look at these old, martial arts films where they have these super abilities, it's like that's what they're trying to, like there is this mystical quality to that. Like that's part of what I think that they're trying to articulate, that the great masters were calm, right? Even in the face of adversarial, like a crazy adversarial force. It's depicted in many ways, not just these martial arts films, but if you've ever seen The Little Buddha with Keanu Reeves, you seen this movie? God. Yeah. But there's this scene in The Little Buddha, and it's Keanu Reeves, which is really trippy, so it's kind of almost hard to watch, but it's amazingly done. And he encounters, it depicts the moment of Siddhartha's awakening under the Bodhi tree, right? And it shows these really beautiful scenes. Like he's at first tempted by the daughters of Mara or whatever, and then he moves through these phases, and it gets to this point where he's sitting in tranquility, and he's like, I will allow nothing to move me from this tranquility. Like, in other words, I'm willing to die to see the truth. I'm willing to surrender myself to see the truth, right? And in this imagery, these huge armies, this armada comes before him, and flaming torches are lit, thousands of flaming torches, archers all draw their bows and they fire. And in his heart, he's like, you can, like, I have to run, I have to run, I have to run. But he stays in tranquility and doesn't move. And it makes me want to cry just thinking about it, because like as the arrows are about to hit him, they turn into flower petals and fall at his, around him, creating beauty. And it keeps going. I'll send you a link for this. It's worth watching, because it depicts that expression of what it's like to let yourself go, how it feels to let yourself go. And then in that surrender, right when you think it's all about to go horribly wrong, something gets flipped around. And that's you moving through your defenses, and your own armor is dropped. And in the absence of your armor, you see the truth, and it's beautiful.